Okay, so here you see a business cycle, and on the x-axis we typically display time, and on the y-axis real GDP. What real GDP is we'll talk about later, but it's basically real GDP is essentially measuring everything in like haircuts or apples, the value of apples. So it's something that can be comparable. That's something that can be compared and that is rid of inflation. But you see there's some vocabulary to it. So when it comes to the business cycle, well, there's a peak and there's a recession followed by a trough. And then hopefully there's again a recovery and there's another peak and a recession. But you also see that most countries, they typically exhibit a long-term trend. And this long-term trend is associated with what we call long-run economic growth, and all those ups and downs in the short run. That is what we typically refer to as a short-run problem. Okay, so now a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of declining real GDP. And at least this is a very common definition. And let's say, to illustrate what that means is, we have a year, and we have, let's say, a quarter, and we have GDP output, and let's say we have quarter 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is year 1, and then we have another year with 2, 3, 4 quarters, and that is year 2. And let's say the GDP is 20, 25, 22, 24. And then again 22, 26, 25, and 23. Okay, according to this definition, which is the one that the public media likes to use, when would we have a recession? Well, here period 2 goes up. Well, it goes down, but only for one period, and it goes up again. Then it goes down again in the next period, so no recession yet. Goes up, but in the third quarter of period 2, we have a recession, or we have a decline in economic output, and in the fourth period. So this would be called a recession. And you can see that it's maybe a little bit problematic, because if we compare it to the previous year, at least in the third period compared to the previous year, we still have a much higher output. So there are different ways of looking at it. So the most common definition is 2 consecutive quarters of declining real GDP. But then there's also some people also use the definition on which is called two consecutive quarters of declining real GDP year on year. So if you use the example, if you define the recession as 2 consecutive quarters of declining real GDP year on year, well then we would not call quarter 3 and 4 of year 2 a recession, because year on year it is not declining output. But again, this here is the most common definition, but there are others too, and in fact the United States uses again a different definition of a recession, which is not really based on a quarterly perspective, but something like there needs to be a sustained decline of economic activity over a longer period. But for this, there is a bureau, an office. It's called I forgot the name now, but some administration. They have a committee, and they will declare a recession, and the recession will incorporate much more than just a decline in real output. It will also have things like unemployment and maybe other indicators. So here a recession defined as 2 quarters of declining real GDP, that is the most common. So when you hear about a recession in the news, what they refer to is like a situation like the 3rd and the 4th quarter of year 2. But then others will say, well, what matters is we have to compare it to the previous quarter. Well, that's the year-on-year perspective. Then we may not necessarily have a recession. And again, the United States uses a much more comprehensive measure that is more targeted towards a sustained economic decline over many more indicators than just GDP output, especially also unemployment or outlook indicators, orders in manufacturing, new building permits, and things like that. So, but anyhow, to keep it simple, the business cycle is an up and down. There's some vocabulary to it. And the most common definition of a recession, which is quite important, is 2 consecutive quarters of declining real GDP. Okay, so in the next video we will talk a little bit more about why people don't like ups and downs in their income.